Okay, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today I have a really cool review for you from the brand NOMOS. A little bit about them. They're a German brand founded back in 1990 by Roland Schwertner, and they have since become the largest manufacturer of mechanical timepieces in all of Germany. In terms of the type of watch, this is an everyday dress watch. Some key characteristics and design language that I look for when looking for a dress watch. Of course, you're going to want that clean, classic, minimalist design and something that is sensibly sized. This is their Tangente Neomatik 39 blue gold, reference number 145, and it's essentially described as an elegant automatic watch with a 38.5 millimeter case diameter with clear typography and a self-assured shine. It stands for functionality, performance, and the desire for the extraordinary. These go for 3,390 MSRP direct from their online store. This was lent in by NOMOS. This is a brand that I've followed and admired for quite some time. So big shout out to NOMOS for sending this review loaner into the channel for me to spend some time with. And that is something that I will have to say, the reason why it's taken so long is because their case design and their specs have always kind of confused me, and there's so many options in terms of sizing that I have never really felt comfortable enough to go out and just purchase a NOMOS, especially at the elevated price point. But I will say, after getting this one in hand, yeah, I think I learned of quite a few things about these in the metal, some good, I should say mostly good. And then, some things that I think I would have preferred were left up to the imagination maybe. But let's go ahead, share that here. So we'll zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, so you guys can already tell this is an absolutely gorgeous timepiece. This is, of course, their Tangente line, which is just fantastic. It has that signature Bauhaus aesthetic that NOMOS do so very well. And the fact that NOMOS are the largest manufacturer of mechanical timepieces in all of Germany really says a lot, considering the horological, history that Germany has, especially within that, Glashütte area. It's pretty amazing, and there's a reason why they're so popular, and I think it's because they really just own their aesthetic. They've created more than just a grouping of very nice models. They've created an amazing brand, I think, that stands for something in terms of their design language, in terms of them being able to offer bang per buck value, a signature look that isn't mistaken, right? A lot of times you might see other watches that look like this, and I feel like although they didn't invent the look, they definitely created the mass appeal for it. So very, very nice. So this is considered their 39 millimeter, but again, kind of like I mentioned, the specs are always a bit confusing, maybe a bit deceiving. So 38.5 millimeters in diameter, 7 millimeters thin, so very nice, and then 47.3 millimeters lug to lug, which isn't that long, but because of the way that they do these lugs, where they almost feel like a separate piece to the case, it can elongate that. So that's something I was always concerned about, because is it going to look oversized because it's all dial? Even though I mean 38.5 millimeters is kind of the perfect size for me in this type of watch, but because of the lug design, because of the large expansive dial, I was always a bit concerned in terms of the way that this would wear. Should I go a size down? Should I go a size up even, right? Depending. So getting this in hand, I have to say, I feel like if I was to purchase one of these myself, I would go for this size range, because it doesn't feel too small. And then also, it has to do a lot with the lug width, right? The lugs here are 19 millimeters, so not overly small. I feel like when you get into that 18 millimeter range, even if you don't have a drastic taper on the strap, it can feel a little bit small. So I think this one kind of hits that nice sweet spot. Now, in terms of the materials, it's everything you would expect. Of course, flat sapphire with inner AR coating. You're also getting a signed push-pull crown. You're getting a display case back with, some light etching, 5 atmospheres of water resistance, and then, of course, the model name there, and then this gorgeous in-house movement, which is really finely decorated. I will say though, one of the things that surprised me is the fact that this is a pretty loud movement. For those of you that are get really upset with things like, let's say, a Miyota 9000 series movement with the rotor sound, you will probably not be too thrilled about the sound of the rotor here. Of course, this does have a display case back, which does make it more audible. Also, if it was solid, it'd probably be a little bit more dampened. And in general, these are thin dress watches, so there's not going to be a lot of dampening. They do have some models that do have more water resistance, so I assume those would be a bit quieter. They also, of course, have hand wind variations as well. But I will say that this is a gorgeous movement. Let me tell you a little bit about it. It's the NOMOS automatic caliber D UW 3001, and it has a 42-hour power reserve, and it beats at 3 hertz. And you know what, 3 hertz isn't shabby, especially considering the fact that it's beating 3 hertz on a really small subdial, right? That sub-seconds subdial is going to be harder to differentiate the smoothness of the sweep. So you don't necessarily need a higher beat rate for something like that. So I don't mind it at all, especially when you consider how thin this movement is, and of course the in-house qualities, whether it be the fact that this is all done from the same factory, right? They're creating the movements, they're assembling the watches. There's just one level of oversight, and everything is a lot more contained. So there's a lot less variation, which is one of the big benefits of an in-house movement. So, and these also have been proven to be quite reliable. I mean, you read a lot more issues about Tudor's movements, and those are selling like hotcakes as well. Or you think about Seiko, right, in terms of the guaranteed accuracy not being too tidy of a guarantee, and a lot of folks not really being too happy with the timekeeping. I've had good luck, but it's one of those things where because it's not a guaranteed spec, then it's like that, right? So you're not getting a guaranteed tight spec here, but I mean, obviously when you have something like this, it's more than just about pure function. It definitely has a lot to do with the style as well. So then getting into the details of this beautiful blue dial is you're going to have these this galvanized blue sunburst dial with no date. So very, very balanced, very symmetrical, which is a huge plus. The index is printed, but it is very, very sharply done. And it does have polished hands. I think the hand stacks on NOMOS are very, very impressive, if I can get the light to catch it just right. But something you're probably noticing while I'm getting the light to capture just right is there are going to be a couple of dust particles on that dial underneath the crystal, which is very unfortunate. I think of course it is going to stand out more because this is a blue dial, and it's one of those things where of course with the naked eye you will probably never notice it. You'll be very happy with what you get, but if you get this under a loop, I will say under magnification, you're going to find some things that you're not going to be necessarily thrilled with, right? So that is a level of reality in terms of the trade-offs here. These are not super small batch, or I think sometimes we can get a bit spoiled by other brands that can do things, let's say, for less, and they get certain things right? We talk about things like alignment and whatnot, and we see other brands do things just bang on, and then other brands don't. And as a big Seiko collector, I'm used to having certain QC issues to look out for. Alignment issues are what I look out for, but not particles, right? In terms of what's underneath the dial, typically that is extremely immaculate, even for cheaper Seiko models, let alone the Grand Seikos. Here, unfortunately, you're going to see some level of particles, but, you're going to have that when you go into stuff within the Swatch group as well. When you look at a Longines, and even further up, you're still going to be susceptible to stuff like that. And just to, for those of you that might be saying, hey, well, it's probably just on top of the crystal. No, right? You still see there's still some particles underneath there, and it's maybe not enough to upset anybody. And honestly, when you can kind of be of two mindsets when you're shopping for a watch like this. Either you have the money for it and you buy it for what it is and you love it and you're not nitpicking it, or it's more of a grail piece and you kind of build up this mystique and all this around it, and then you buy it and then you scrutinize it heavily, and then yeah, you find little things that may upset you. So it's not a one size fits all in terms of everyone's experience. I will say this is not like grossly bad. I mean, I've definitely have seen things underneath, and then of course depending on where the dust lays, it's more obvious. Sometimes stuff can just fall, and end up on the rehot and you never see it. But when you do find something like that, a little dust under the dial, it can be, I don't know. It's just, I guess I wasn't expecting that. And I was just really expecting, I see all these really cool macro shots of these on YouTube and everything is just super clean, super spick and span. So yeah, that's kind of what I expected. And, to keep it real with you guys, there's just, little stuff here and there. And again, while on the wrist, you're never gonna notice that. But of course, as I'm getting this close up or, trying to get video of it, trying to take pictures of something for Instagram, something like that, I do start looking a little bit closer and noticing those little blemishes. So not the end of the world by any means, not grossly horrible, horrendous QC or anything like that. Just something to notice and something to take account of if that is one of your, watch collecting pet peeves. Now, this does give you 5 atmospheres of water resistance, which isn't bad. It isn't great. I mean, it's some level of water resistance. So 5 atmospheres is 50 meters, which is better than 30, which a lot of people, will typically target these to be around 30 at the lowest and then 100 meters at the higher end. And of course, Nomos even has models that are 200 meters that are, still quite thin and very dressy. Now, the lugs are 19 millimeters. You do also get this black Horween genuine shell quarter-inch strap, which does have a slight taper. I think a lot of you see this and go, oh, that's a non-tapering strap. But it does have a mild taper of 1 millimeter, essentially from 19 down to 18. And then you do have this 21 millimeter wide signed buckle, which is really beautifully executed and engineered, which we'll show you how that works on the wrist right now. So with that said, let's actually get this piece on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this wears really, really well. Beautifully centered. I think it's a great size, and of course, it might appear a little large, and it'll definitely appear a bit large if I get my wrist a bit close to the camera there. It's going to be a lot of lens distortion. It's going to appear much larger. So what I'll do is I'll leave my wrist nice and low here and just tighten up the frame so you guys can get a clear look at this in terms of the details while still getting a more realistic aspect ratio. So you can see, although these wire lugs, or I shouldn't say wire lugs, I mean, they are, they have angles and everything like that. So, but in terms of just looking down and seeing them, the border of them, they can feel a bit elongated, even though they do have, of course, this nice step down in terms of the angle. So in terms of wear, it's not really stretching it out too much on my wrist, and I don't have an especially flat wrist. I do have a rather, relatively large wrist, but it's not flat. So a lot of it, of course, is within kind of this diameter versus this one, right? But this is a great looking watch, and you guys can see it wears nice and flat, very thin. That highly reflective finish definitely helps it visually be quite thin because it's just reflecting, off of my skin and stuff like that. So it does help everything blend very seamlessly. So really beautiful watch to wear. But I will say, like I mentioned, I don't know if the camera, we'll see if the microphone can pick this up. Okay, so I don't know if you guys can pick that up, but there is a bit of rotor noise. I will say there's less rotor whir because it's not like the rotor will just, kind of free spin, because I believe this is actually winding in both directions, right? Whereas with, let's say, a Valjoux 7750 or a Miyota 9000 series, where essentially only one of them, one direction of the rotor spinning is going to actually be winding, the other direction can be free sprung essentially and just kind of zoom around and feel a little bit odd on the wrist. So you're not going to get that feeling, but you will hear it. And like, let's say if you were to just tap on it, there's a certain noise. I don't know if we'll see if we can hear it. So I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I will say, yeah, it is quite audible. And I think, especially for an automatic movement with this level of thinness, it's probably to be expected, right? So I wouldn't even count that really against them, but it is something I think to keep in mind. I think a lot of times we over romanticize, the ideas of watches just because they're expensive, just because they're elegant, just because the design aesthetic is so well thought out and well put together. I think sometimes we can kind of overestimate in terms of the way everything else is put together, right? And you start thinking, oh, well, if everything is just going to be like a luxury vehicle, you close the door and it's going to have a nice solid sound to it. And some of you guys know from driving luxury vehicles, there are some nice cars out there that you close the door and there's a level of tinniness, and it's just part of those quirks. So Nomos, in terms of their design language, is not just quirky, but even I'd say in terms of the positioning of this particular timepiece within the market, right? And I know some of you are probably thinking this is probably a little bit large on my wrist, but I think it is actually quite a nice fit. I mean, it is a large dial, but I don't think that I would want to scale down, and I don't think that I would want to scale up, at least within this particular case shape. So I'm pretty happy with it. So with that said, let's get it off the wrist. Although there's no loom, we can do some low light transition and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. All right, so one thing I always like to work in, of course, is a bit of low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, maybe just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree, or just spending some time in your favorite automobile. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe even include some harsh lighting, which typically could expose any types of production defects you're going to see here. Though it looks great, and some of you are probably noticing that, yeah, that dial looks quite clean, depending on if you're watching this on your phone or on a TV or a computer screen. So yeah, again, I don't want it to be overestimated, or at the same time not underestimated in terms of the the level of quality here. That's a very high level of quality, but again, I do think we can over romanticize the idea of certain watches, and it can skew our perceptions and also our expectations, right? And I think because I have been so excited about this brand for so long, I probably did over expect what it was going to offer. But I will say I'm still hugely impressed, and I definitely want to check out more models. And maybe this one isn't the one for me. I prefer some of their lighter dial models, whether they be a pale silver or kind of a white style dial. But I love blue dial watches. I think the strap is amazing. I think everything is really well put together. This is a very handsome piece. And if it's something you've been looking at, I hope that this video does help you, come to your conclusion sooner rather than later. In terms of closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, it wears really nicely. It's compact, but with plenty of wrist presence. That expansive dial layout, is well framed by the case and the lugs, right? I like that this has a similar thickness or thinness, you could say, to the framing of the dial and that bezel, as well as the width of the lugs themselves. I like that there's that level of consistency and uniformity, and just kind of a fully complete design there. It's not anything where you feel like, oh, well, this was an afterthought, or, you know, this was a convenient, feature. Like, all of it feels very purposeful, which I can absolutely appreciate. In terms of model variants, definitely check the links for options and availability. There's a ton of different options there. And then in terms of comparable models, yes, you can buy cheaper, Stova variations on this watch. With a very, that similar kind of Bauhaus look that I think maybe A. Lange & Söhne may have been one of the first to actually premiere this particular kind of typography and everything in layout. But yeah, these are in a whole different tier in terms of the level of refinement. When you look at something like a Stova or a Laco that have a similar look, those are great brands. They do go way back, but I will say that what they're producing is a facsimile with less focus and less refinement, and they can still be nice, and they can still be nice enough for the consumers. But if you are looking at that versus this is just a whole nother tier in terms of the level of quality, the level of even when you just look at the flow and the consistency in design and that execution, there's just another level to it, which, hey, if you have the budget to appreciate that and you have the mindset to appreciate that, you will be very happy. But there's also plenty of people where they'll be happy with a Timex Marlin or something like that and don't need something like this. So it's not a one size fits all. For me, guys, bottom line is NOMOS really strike a unique sweet spot of high design, value for money, and brand recognition with legitimate specs. They're kind of like the Tudor of dress watches, and that is a really great niche to be leading the space in. I mean, so you can't really be too mad. Again, it's not a perfect watch. I wouldn't even call it a flawed watch. It's a very beautiful watch, great brand, and they sent this over to me with no expectation or requirement. Essentially, it was just very much like, hey, if you want to check it out, let us know which models you might want to see, and we'll get your information to the right person. So I will say that they were very confident in their product, as they should be. And, I hope that the tone of this particular review, it feels more evenly keeled, which is what I'm hoping that it is, right? I'm not trying to hype this watch up, but at the same time, I'm not trying to downplay it. I think it's a great timepiece, and I'm definitely looking forward to checking out more Nomoses in the metal here on the channel. So with all that said, let me know what you guys all think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.